Hi, welcome to the Department of Commerce's Black History Month presentation of Homage. My name is Terry Batch, and I'm in the International Trade Administration, Global Markets in the U.S. field based in Los Angeles, California.
My name is Nia McAdoo, and the Homage Exhibit is a private collection owned by my husband and myself. We travel all over the country bringing this exhibit up close and personal to different communities. And so we're really happy to be here today and to partner with you in your office so that all of the staff can get a up close and personal look at history.
So can you tell us about this document here and what's going on with this?
Yeah, so this is one of the older documents in our collection. It's an inventory of an estate from 1801. So somebody's passed away and they're divvying up everything that's owned for children or relatives. So this is everything of value. So you can tell that he's not a wealthy individual. But the most valuable item owned is a Negro wench, which is a black woman. We know from her value that she's past childbearing age and she's doing cooking and cleaning in the house. I like to bring this piece out because a lot of people have ideas of working plantations with hundreds of slaves picking a crop, when the reality is a lot of people owned one or two. And this actually proves that you didn't necessarily need to be wealthy to own another human being. And so this is one of the items that we always start the exhibit with. But we're very intentional in how we set shows up. We want to make sure we show balance whenever possible. So we would have a piece like this showing African Americans very much as property, or stereo view cards showing working plantations next to a document like this, which is signed by Frederick Douglass, and it brings that DC history in. And it's a land transfer deed from later in life when he's working for the federal government right here in DC. One of my favorite pieces in the collection is here, and it's a document signed by Macon B. Allen. Macon B. Allen is born in Indiana in the 1800s and has dreams of being an attorney, right? And so because of racial restrictions, he can't get into law school. At the time, the state of Maine did not have a racial restriction for sitting for the bar. So he packs up, moves to Maine. He does work with a white abolitionist attorney and does like an apprenticeship. And he's able to sit for the bar, passes, and becomes the first African American attorney in the country. This document is dated 1878. During Reconstruction, he moves to Charleston, and with two other African American attorneys, they start the first black law firm in the country. This document is from when he's a probate judge in Charleston County. And so after that, he's unfortunately run out of Charleston after Reconstruction, comes to DC where he works for the federal government. And so we tried to pull pieces that tie into local DC history, government history, and it really shows the depth of the collection. The overall collection has over 650 pieces, and today we have a little under 200 on display.
Explain this right here.
Yeah, so this is a Charleston Courier newspaper from 1834, October. So this is an advertising manager's copy, so the numbers indicate how many more days an ad has been paid to run. You'll see someone selling church pews, someone's opening a dance school, they're looking for students. But the two ads I'll show you are here, and they both have the same icon, which is a runaway slave ad. The one on top is interesting for a number of reasons. It's a $100 reward for a missing family. And we say missing because the ad indicates they don't know if they fled or if they were kidnapped and resold, which was common. The ad indicates they've been looking for them for over a year, so you see the time, the energy, the money they put into getting property back. We have a woman named Penny. She's 35 to 40. She has a teenage son named James, who's 14 or 15, and a 2-year-old named Millie. And in the document, Millie is described as being mulatto, so we know she's biracial. More than likely, the person who fathered her is also the one trying to get them back into enslavement. Our collection also has a December 1834 Courier. That ad still appears. We know from our research that it runs until the following February. So it's a good piece, and people always have questions of what the numbers mean and how we acquired it. And this is one of the pieces we acquired at a library auction. And so we have a number of newspapers, and we're able to introduce different events or people, movements through media. On this next table, I'll show you an example of that. So this is June 1921, and this is newspaper coverage out of California on the Tulsa Race Massacre. So you'll see it says martial law rules, thousands in battle, torch plied in Tulsa. And so we get a lot of people who come through the exhibit and they're like, well, why don't you talk about this or that or this person? And since we only deal with original artifacts and documents, we can only tell the story if we have that piece that accompanies it. And so this was a piece that we acquired prior to the 100th anniversary, which was in 2021. And so we were able to tell that story through a library auction where we acquired this piece. So that's a good example of that. 1921, yes. And so everything is period. And we talk a lot about everyday life. Another piece that I really love is at the end of this table. And again, it's another local DC story. One of my favorite things to collect are press photos. And so typically when you have a picture that's being used across the country, it's getting picked up by media, they will have, and I'm going to flip this over, on the back of it, they'll have a date stamp and a description of the original wire or article. Now, this is a group of Howard University students, and they're at the Attorney General's Conference on Crime. This is 1934, and they're looking to have lynching recognized as a federal hate crime. We know that just happened. You'll see that they're standing next to one another. This is day 2 of that student protest. On day 1, they're arrested because they're protesting. On day 2, they come out, they stand side by side, which is not a protest. It's people standing in line. What you'll see if you take a closer look is that they all have the nooses around their neck because they're unable to hold signs, and so they do this silent protest with the noose to protest lynching. And so that's another powerful piece that has a local DC tie-in.
So tell us about this right here, and I see that we have Madam C.J. Walker noted on this piece.
Yeah, definitely. So Madam C.J. Walker, we know, is the first African-American woman to be a millionaire in this country. And she's based out of Indianapolis. This is actually her headquarters that she built from the ground up, and it still stands. We were there maybe 2 weeks ago, and so we were able to see the building, and it's very much still in use. And so Madam C.J. Walker makes her millions from black hair care. And so one thing that's really cool, and I'll show you, these are original product tins. And so this is the glossine that really put her on the map. So not only did she create products, but she created beauty schools where African-American women could come to learn the trade, to start their own businesses and contribute to the greater economy. This is another one. It's a temple solve, and this one actually still has product in it. Yeah. And so it's always pieces that we like to showcase. But an interesting story on the back end is that my husband and I have to know what's important to history before the general public, right? So we can acquire the pieces. And so we acquired our Madam C.J. Walker tins and artifacts prior to the Netflix special. Post Netflix special, the prices are inflated, and so we can no longer acquire those pieces. The same thing with the paper we talked about with the Tulsa Race Massacre. Okay. Once 100 years hit, people knew about it, so they're searching for the artifacts related to it. And so we have to know what is culturally important before everyone else does, if that makes sense. This is another piece that has a local tie-in. And again, a press photo, like I said, I'm very drawn to those pieces. And so this is Lois Lippman, and she's the first African-American woman to have a professional job at the White House. And one thing about press photos, and I'll turn that sideways, is they'll tell you the date. And let's look on the back to see if this one, I can't remember if this one has a cutout. Yeah. So it's 1953, and this is August 16th. The exhibit uses period language. So Lois is assistant to presidential assistant Sherman Adams, and she's the first Negro to work as a White House secretary. She worked for the Eisenhower headquarters in New York in 1952 and was given the job after the inauguration. And so she, right, exactly. There's one thing that's I like to show people. With the exhibit, you have the ability to look at somebody's trajectory, right? And so I'll give you two examples of that. The Fort Worth Mind is an African-American newspaper out of Texas. Here, I always like to point out, it's a member of the Associated Negro Press, like the Associated Press. They had a division for African-American papers. And this is March 1957. Martin Luther King is speaking at a graduation in Kentucky, but he's not a household name yet. And so the paper has to describe him to tell you why you should care that he's speaking at graduation. So what it says is, he is the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. And it tells you that he's the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association that did the Montgomery bus boycott. So that's the light bulb when people read it, because they know Rosa Parks, they know the bus boycott, but they did not know Martin Luther King Jr. yet. And so we know that in a few years, he's a household name, everyone knows him, he no longer would need that same introduction. Another example of that is this 1956 press photo. You have Autherine Lucy, who's integrating the University of Alabama, but her attorneys are from the NAACP. So she's actually represented by Thurgood Marshall, who we know becomes the first African American on the Supreme Court, and Constance Baker Motley, who's tucked in there, and she's the first African American woman to be appointed as a federal judge. And so, again, in a few years, everyone knows Thurgood Marshall, everybody knows Constance Baker Motley, but in 1956, this is what got them to those positions. Wow. And it talks about just the caliber of attorneys working for school integration through the NAACP. So those are a few pieces that I like to point out as well. We get a lot of questions about how we acquire our artifacts. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of newspapers will come from newspaper auctions. And I'll show you an example of this. So this is September 18th, 1963. And this is the Detroit Free Press, and they're covering the funeral of the little girls who were murdered in the church bombing in Birmingham. But if you take a peek in here, you'll see that it was added to the archives on September 20th, 1963. So what would happen? Something major would happen. They would take 50 copies, put them in the archives, but then in 20 years, 30 years, they say, okay, do we still need this? And if the answer is no, they'll pare it down, auction the rest. And now, especially since everything is being digitized, they don't need as many hard copies that have been saved over the years, so they will auction those to raise money. And so we're able to acquire those pieces that way. But whenever you see that an item was sent to an archive, that's sort of the story behind that. We talked about Thurgood Marshall on the previous table. And this really gives you a greater insight to the work that they were doing for school integration. This is a fundraising letter sent by the Committee of 100, which is a organization working to raise funds for different initiatives. This fundraising letter is in support of the Legal Defense Fund. And what it says is that in 1964, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund spent $1.4 million to fight school integration. And it goes on to say that they filed 84 suits in 15 states to desegregate universities, local school boards, and things like that. And what the letter also says is, with more money, we can do more. But it really talks about the fight the NAACP had in school integration across the country. But I always like to point that figure out, the cost, right? Because $1.4 million, you guys would know better than me what that means in today's dollars. But, you know, it's a substantial budget just for the school integration cases. So that's definitely something that I like to highlight. So this is a press photo, again, one of my favorite things to collect. And this is on Channing Phillips. And Channing Phillips ran the Washington, D.C. campaign for Robert F. Kennedy. After he's assassinated, the D.C. delegation nominates Channing Phillips for president as a son, as a favorite son. And so Channing Phillips is actually the first African American to be nominated for president. It was a symbolic move because he had worked so closely with that campaign, but he is still the first African American to be nominated for the president.
That's interesting because I've never heard his name before.
Yeah, and a lot of these names would be lost to history, right? And so what we do is try to amplify those voices, those events that people don't really know about. And again, it has a really cool DC connection. One of the pieces that I really like in our collection is a hand-typed. So it's a hand-typed report, and it's the annual report from 1968 of the NAACP. And it's the Regional Youth Field Directors Report. And so it really does a deep dive into all of the initiatives they were working on and what happened in the aftermath of MLK's assassination. And so it tells you everything that the youth were doing for employment, for voting rights, for integration in 1968. But it's a powerful report, and it really goes deep into, you know, what was being done, like boots on the ground, and it's a really interesting read.
Oh, wow. So what is this right here? This looks like Martin Luther, it says Mrs.
Martin Luther King Jr. Right.
So this is from Coretta Scott King?
It is. And so what you'll see is this is from October 1st, 1968. So this is months after her husband's assassination, and you'll see it's signed Coretta Scott King. So we know that well into 1970, Coretta Scott King responds personally to all letters of prayer, offers of concern, flowers, and we have a Connecticut couple that had mass said for her and her children. And so what she's asking, not only saying thank you, but she's asking them to continue her husband's work as they strive towards peace, justice, and brotherhood. And so we know she's thrust into the national spotlight following his assassination, but it really shows her grace in the midst of her own grief and raising her children after the assassination, that she would personally respond to these letters. Yeah. And so we're gonna, oh, this is a good one. This is an original campaign poster from Shirley Chisholm, 1972, in her Ann Arbor, Michigan office. And so we know Shirley Chisholm is the first African American woman to run on the national ticket. And so this is one of her buttons as well. Oh, yeah, so a lot of people love to see this piece when we have it on display.
Nice.
So we're going to keep on.
I love all the Black culture.
Yeah.
You got Michael Jackson.
Stevie Wonder, right.
Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yes. And so throughout, from the 40s until our last table in the collection, we do feature a lot of Black publications. So the Jet magazines, which was a weekly, and it was pocket sized. It was meant to be shared and left at the beauty salon or the barber shop. And this is one that I just have fond memories of. Another piece that people love is this S is for Soul Sister.
I like
this
this one.
it's
I
so
remember
cute.
this one from
Yeah.
before, yeah.
And so this is Chicago teachers who are looking to have culturally relevant items in their classroom. They took pictures of their students and made, instead of A for apple, A is for afro, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really cute collection, and we have the entire collection for Homage.
I think I remember some of those covers.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of what we do with the exhibit really speaks to the power of the first person to do something. So the power of one. We have Wilder, who becomes the first African American governor of Virginia. We have David Dinkins, who's the first African American mayor of New York City. And it's important that people see who laid that framework. But since it's set up as a timeline, it's also important to see how recent this was, right? And so as you go through, people are able to look at and see things very differently when it's set up the way it is today. We have a lot of DC on this table, like a lot of Washington, DC. So when Carol Moseley Braun runs for Senate out of Illinois and she wins her election, we have the Million Man March in 1995 that's right in DC. Right, exactly. We have Barack Obama and his historic run and win. We have the protests in support of Justice Jackson during her hearings, and Kamala Harris. And so we like to end on a note where people can identify with, it's current, they know these stories, they can remember where they were, those types of feelings. And so that is what we bought today, and it's been absolutely great sharing this with you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
very
you so
welcome.
much.
I love
This
it.
has been so enlightening.
Yes.
And for our colleagues that are not in the building,
Yes.
to be
You
able to
still
see
get to
this.
experience the
Yeah.
Homage exhibit, so it's really good that we're
That's
capturing this, definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
I like how you have it set up.